And for more on the crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by Michael Shank. He is an associate director at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, a policy organization that promotes peace. Michael, welcome back to the show as always. First, I want to ask you about these latest EU sanctions against Russia. Do you think it will complicate this already shaky ceasefire?
Absolutely. What is bad for the ceasefire are the EU sanctions. Russia's saying that they're going to respond by banning air travel to Asia through Russian airspace and also blocking gas imports into Ukraine, into the EU. Other things that are bad for the ceasefire, as your reporter already identified, U.S. military exercises in the Black Sea. That's going to be bad. Rumors that NATO countries are going to supply weapons to the Ukrainian government. Out of the NATO conference, there was rumors about 5 countries supplying weapons, U.S. one of those. And then rhetoric in eastern Ukraine around the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. That narrative also not good for the ceasefire. So yeah, I would add to the EU sanctions everything else I mentioned in terms of undermining the ceasefire's hold.
But we've already had this prisoner exchange, more than 1,000 prisoners between Russia and Ukraine, which shows that there is some serious discussion going on. You also have the presidents of Ukraine and Russia communicating with one another directly. Is that a positive step in the right direction?
Absolutely.
I mean, they can really keep this thing solid.
So the flip of what's bad for the ceasefire, what's good for the ceasefire is Putin and Poroshenko talking today. More of that should happen. Prisoner swap, over 1,200, more of that should happen. Other things that would be good for the ceasefire, OSCE monitors on the ground to make sure the ceasefire is holding. That would be good. Ongoing conversation about a political deal. Apparently there's conversation about semi-autonomous, decentralized arrangement, provided that Donetsk, Mariupol, Luhansk wouldn't obfuscate or block any Ukraine integration into the EU. So there might be a deal swap there. And then any economic aid. U.S. has given $60 million in non-lethal aid. That should continue. That would help the ceasefire. So there's positive, negative in here. And yes, more talking would be absolutely good for the ceasefire.
So if you have Russia and Ukraine dealing directly with one another, should NATO member states pull out of what they are trying to propose?
I've long proposed this both in written form and on TV here, that any NATO involvement only escalates the situation, only makes Putin more fearful, more guarded, more defensive, more inclined to support the separatists on the ground in eastern Ukraine. I think now is the time for more conversation with Putin and Poroshenko, probably daily, international communities to support it. But we may have some kind of West Germany, East Germany situation, Georgia, Moldova arrangement in Ukraine, and the international community has to be ready to support that.
You touched on the issue of international monitors. That's something that has been discussed in a possible peace plan. But they have come out and said that the next few days will be crucial for this ceasefire. What are some things we should look for in the next few days? What are some possible flashpoints?
Right, so a ceasefire was tried in June 2014, so earlier this summer, but that was mandated from Ukraine primarily. It wasn't a mutual agreement. Putin wasn't scratching down the ceasefire, the 12-point ceasefire deal, as he did on the airplane this time. I think sanctions, Catherine Ashton has been reticent about sanctions, and I think she should follow her reluctance, because EU is really choosing to ramp up sanctions right at the time where Putin and Poroshenko are talking. So in the next few days, down space or gas imports, get OSCE monitors in there as soon as possible to monitor, do anything to de-escalate. Unfortunately, it's heavily armed already, so any NATO weaponry coming in by the U.S. or other would be very problematic. But yeah, these next 3-5 days are critical.
Are you optimistic now that perhaps this crisis has turned a corner and now they've rounded the bend to a more lasting solution?
I'm very optimistic. You know, Poroshenko has to say, this is our independence, this is our sovereignty, no one can come in and take part of Ukraine, eastern Ukraine. But I think the deal will be done behind doors, which will probably cede some semi-autonomous arrangement to the separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk and Mariupol. So I'm very hopeful.
All right, Michael Shank, as always, we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.